Hi everyone, it's Elizabeth here. So I wanted to do this video in regards to how Americans have lost their sense and ability to understand how to eat. This is a very fascinating topic for me because I do believe our eating habits and behaviors are influenced by several things. First, it definitely comes from the home, so how you were raised and what type of food you eat as a child definitely influences your choices when you become an adult. Second, I do think it is very socioeconomically based on your wealth income. So obviously poverty level income, family incomes tend to generally eat more junk food and or fast food as compared to the more affluent crowd. Obviously, our peers and our society also shape us, as well as our urban planning as well. If you go to certain industrial towns or small places, small towns and villages in middle America, you tend to find more fast food as compared to more urban areas that are actual running cities that are not dying out, or bigger cities such as like Seattle, New York, San Francisco, Portland, Los Angeles, where you have a lot more of like the smaller mom and pop businesses. You have people who are very aware about sustainable eating and GMO foods. So you see a lot of more like healthy, organic type of cafes. So to get to the nitty gritty, the socially engineering of our eating habits have been an issue probably for about the last 100 years. There has been a lot of propaganda and influence from the government, from the Food and Drug Administration, in addition to propaganda that has happened from the wars. So if you do look back at World War I food propaganda, a lot of people in the States were encouraged to eat more rye, more produce, more fish, and save things like the meat, the wheat, and the kind of the bigger bulk foods for the men. They were also taught to ration their food a little bit more because food will win the war. And that is very interesting if you think about it, because if people don't have food, they go crazy. And you see this in terms of people raiding grocery stores before and after natural disasters. If people don't have food or water, that's one of your Maslow hierarchies of need, the society will crumble and will go mad. So at least that was some form of smart propaganda, I think, in World War I, in terms of telling people how to ration and to eat more of like the wholer type of food that is less hardy, and leave the more hardy food for the actual soldiers at war. If you think about eating the energy of animals and stuff like that, you do eat the energy and the emotion of the animal. So if these guys are at war, they do have to have some sort of barbaric animalistic energy in order to be able to fight and go into combat. And sustaining themselves on broccoli and peas is probably not going to ensure that they do their duties abroad. A lot of our parents who were boomers, born in the 40s and 50s, grew up on the TV dinner. Once that television came into the American home in the 50s or the 60s, I think, the television TV dinner culture started to come out, and a lot more canned goods and stuff like that started to come out because of World War II. And you kind of saw this birth of eating more Spam and macaroni and cheese, and started to get away from the more peasant type of culture of eating, which was eating from the land, whether that was the meat or the milk that you got from the cow in the backyard, the eggs from your chicken. You ate the cabbage and the iceberg lettuce that came from the ground. So they moved away during the 40s, 50s, and 60s away from more peasant style eating to more processed style eating. And then once you started to look at things like the 70s and 80s, that's when certain diet products started to come out. And that's when, like diet soda, I think it was in the 80s, where aspartame came out. My mother told me the first time she drank a diet Sprite, she broke out in hives everywhere. So that's really interesting, because for her entire human existence at that point, being in her 20s, she never drank aspartame, and that was the first time, and her body broke out in hives. So that's a clear indicator of how chemicals and these fake sugars and things like that really do affect us. Now we have gotten to a point where we're consuming so much that we're breeding this into our blood and our DNA, and it's getting passed down to our future generations. So the kids that are getting born today do have a little bit more of a somewhat tolerance towards chemicals, because that's what the most likely the mom was eating that while she was pregnant. Um, Now, if you start to progress, definitely in the last 20 or so years, you see a lot more of the GMO type foods being made and or created, or they're able to clone sheeps and cows. So how do you not know that the meat that you're eating from a grocery store is actually coming from a real cow or chicken? I think these are problems that are going to go into the future of understanding, like, is this meat or is this egg really real? You see this in China. They can recreate an egg from certain chemicals. They're starting to create vegan eggs. So this is the future, and that part's really scary. But where I want to go more along the lines with this video is that Americans are so bombarded with so much marketing and media and propaganda from the diet industry, which is worth billions and billions of dollars, on top of the fast food industry, which a research study came out in October 2018. This is 1 in 3 Americans eat fast food, generally every day, or at least every week. And this is a problem because we have been biologically tricked and addicted to more the processed type of foods, which has a lot of the sugar, the salt, and the trans fat in it, higher quantities of that. But we're eating more boxed and processed stuff. And I saw this one time. I went to a Safeway in Lower Queen Anne, which is not too far from where I live, and I saw an old man. He definitely looked like he was in his 80s. I saw an old man at the cashier counter, and I saw a young guy at a cashier counter. The old man had red peppers, artichokes, he had milk, I think some rice, and there was like one other thing, like I think just like a baguette. And now the young guy behind him, he had beer, Coca-Cola, cereal, frozen pizza, and ice cream. So you can tell that there's a generational difference, not only in the way that people shop, but what your palates crave. Our older generation, the people who are in their 70s, 80s, and 90s, born in the 20s, 30s, and 40s, if they were raised in a healthy household, or at least on some form of rationing, because in the Great Depression and World War II, even if you were a teenager, you had to ration during that time. They tend to eat still closer to the land and to the more natural ways of eating, how our ancestors have always done, especially our ancestors in America, if that's your genetic lineage. As compared to today, a lot of millennials don't know how to cook or prepare food. They're too busy. They don't really want to. They're a little bit more affluent, so they don't necessarily have to waste their time cooking because they're not necessarily at poverty level, so they don't have to worry about rationing. They can just eat out and buy like a $9 frozen pizza and pop it in the oven. As compared to the other generations, $9 could actually feed your entire family for 3 or 4 meals by working with the basics like beans, meat, rice, vegetables, stuff like that. In the fitness industry, years ago, I saw this. Once the paleo diet came out, all of these fitness instructors, like little sheep, went nutso over paleo, and so did a lot of fitness consumers. A lot of people jumped on that bandwagon, and they found within 2 to 4 months, they felt really weak, they felt unnourished and fulfilled, and they went off of paleo. And a lot of that is because our body is so used to eating wheat nowadays and or heartier carbohydrates that it's really difficult to go cold turkey from eating all different types of carbohydrates to just eating like sweet potatoes and quinoa. So these gradual changes take time, but the problem where so many people are coming in is that there are too many conflicting sources of information. And science can be amazing, but science can also be very difficult to understand, because one day coffee is good for you and the next day coffee isn't, and the next day red wine is good for you, and then it's not. There's been so much research out now, even with things that are saying coconut oil is bad for you and olive oil is bad for you. And it's like, you know what? The fucking Greeks have been eating olive oil for centuries. The Europeans, the Italians, all of them have been eating olive oil for a very long time. They've been heating it up and they've been completely fine. It's about using common sense, logic, and some I guess wisdom to know what is healthy and what is not. Obviously, olive oil is a better source of oil than using something like soybean oil, because soybeans have been linked to being raised or, harvested in a lot of genetically modified farms, to where tofu and all the soy stuff can, it definitely can have traces of it being GMO. So the confusion comes in because everybody in America has some sort of miracle diet or miracle workout plan, and it's a guaranteed. Some people say you need to cut carbohydrates, and then you go on YouTube and there's an ad that say, well, if you want to lose weight, you actually need to eat more carbohydrates. And it gets so confusing. It's like, what do I do? This, that, and the other. The biggest problem, if you are struggling with your weight and or you're a food addict, you're an emotional eater, you're addicted to fast food, you need to look at what you eat and analyze, is this really real food that I'm eating? You have to understand that even pasta itself is technically processed because the wheat came from, the shaft of wheat, and then it was grounded down into flour. The flour was made into pasta. So to some degree, yes, the pasta is a better option than eating a McDonald's hamburger bun. Okay, so you have to look at what is processed in your diet and how much is coming from whole food sources. We tend to use this a lot in fitness, to advocate for people to eat whole foods. You have to understand that apples come before applesauce. Applesauce comes before apple pie. So although you might be eating apple pie, you might be thinking that you're eating fruit, but what you don't realize is that it's laden with sugar and all these chemicals and things like that to keep the pie fresh on its shelf life for 2 or 3 weeks at your mainstream grocery store. So obviously making it yourself is a better option. But the thing is, you need, the history of humanity has never gone wrong when eating directly from the land. And a lot of issues are coming about today, especially in the paleo world, because people are jumping on this bandwagon and eating more meat, but they don't realize the meat you're eating today is absolutely different than what our ancestors ate thousands of years ago when they were barefoot, wearing a loincloth, and sporking a buffalo with a trident. It's like, you need to use some common sense about this. Unless you're spending top dollar on some quality meat from the local butcher, or you're hunting for your own food and stuff like that, it's probably processed, especially if it's coming from a mainstream brand like Tyson and all of those companies. I don't even know the names of them because I don't eat meat, but there's so much confusion today because there's so much conflicting information, and everybody is looking around and running around and looking at everybody else, but they don't want to take responsibility to actually change their behaviors, to change their habits, or to cut out some of the sweet foods and replace it with some whole foods. This is a process that takes time, and it will be a separate video in itself. But you have to know that reading about health and diet is really good. And I'm not saying to take everything with a grain of salt, but you just don't get suckered in to everything that you read about everything. You really have to question certain things nowadays. I love science. I'm an advocate for science. But I really do think, like Einstein has said, that the scientists, if they want a certain type of result, most likely you can kind of manipulate a research study to get the result that you want. especially once you're starting to look at funding. So obviously, if Monsanto has funded a research project, the research project is going to say genetically modified foods are okay for you to eat. Common sense says you don't stick artificial shit in the soil and hope that it grows. No, it's been shown before that genetically modified trees have been rejected from the soil. We have this battle between the artificial world and the natural world. And if you believe in spirituality, God has created the natural world. If you believe in that, you might not. You might believe in it from the scientific point of view of evolution. But the natural world has been sustaining and recycling itself for thousands, if not millions of years. There's debate on that. I'm not going into that part of it. But the artificial world is something that is new to humans. So, for example, if we continue to eat chemicals and all this junk in our food, humans in 1,000 years are going to look and be very, very different than what they are right now. The whole spectrum of aspartame and all these chemicals in our food is such a minute pinprick in the evolutionary path of humans. Humans have been eating natural food for thousands and thousands of years. The Romans, the Greeks, the Vikings, the Egyptians, all of them. During the era of the birth of Christ, they've been eating figs and dates. The people from the Middle East have been surviving off of that type of food for thousands of bloody years. So we are now being bred into becoming like robots and zombies through the manipulation of the quality of our food with all the junk and the chemicals in it and just the processing down of everything. So there's so much confusion because it's a free market capitalistic society and everybody has an opinion and everyone's trying to make a buck on a business. So you have to be discerning and question everything that you read. The reality is everybody's body thrives on something different. Most people thrive on higher protein, lower complex carbohydrate or simple carbohydrate diets. I am completely the other way around. I am plant-based. Sometimes I do eat vegetarian food, but a lot of times it's vegan. And I do better with higher carbohydrate diets, which does include grain and produce, fruits and vegetables. And I don't digest protein as well. So, that could be an outlier. Any type of vegetarian is going to need more carbohydrate in their diet because if not, they're going to wither down like this. They can't just eat salad and fruit. There are very few people who can survive off of that. So these are some thoughts that I have. There is a lot of confusion. I've put links down below that kind of support this video. If you are confused, definitely, write me a comment or a question. Definitely feel free to ask. I'm also working with clients virtually. We can meet over camera or do this via email as well. There are certain options that can work within your budget range on how to set you up on a healthier path of eating. Just know, throughout humanity, eating closest to nature and whole foods has never people have never gone off the deep end. The reason why we have cancer and autism and all these diseases today, we have to start questioning, why is this happening? It can be because of our stressful life, but a lot of it probably comes from our food and water sources, and we have to be a little bit more aware of this. So if you do have confusion and what you should be eating, just know there are certain methods of eating that work better for other people. It will be an experiment that you will have to do on your own to see what works best for you. But definitely look at the blog links below and some of the mindful eating stuff that I have that can kind of help set you up to understand what should go on a plate of food and stuff like that. The healthier, closest to nature you eat, the more produce, fruits, and vegetables that you eat, generally things never go wrong in that sense. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you for liking, sharing, and subscribing. If you'd like, you can support me on Patreon, and please subscribe to this channel, and I'll talk to you guys soon. Bye.